me and my supports. So this is just a little video sped up to show you the fun and games I had. There's been lots of fun and games recently. Trying to get a couple of panels, more or less full-size panels, on a vertical off the floor. So thankfully, I've got some supports which I've had for a good few years now. And they're telescopic. They're not like acros. They're very lightweight. They're just about hold a bit of plasterboard up, and not much more than that. But they're invaluable for situations like this where you're working on your own. So first of all, it was a question of I took the decision to make a timber frame to support. It runs across where there's a purling, which is sort of dividing where the insulation is that you can see dropping down. So it just seemed a bit easier rather than using the metal rail for that. And then what I did was I actually used one of the metal rails just to be able to hold the bottom end of the plasterboard once it's put in place. That way it gives it a little bit of support while I sort of try and mess around with the supports and get organised. So cut my first board, took my measurements. Still a fair size, and there's still a reasonable amount of weight to it. It's 12mm board, and that's not far off 2 meters by 1.2 meters. So the issue I had initially was that I'd put a rail on the floor as well to be able to hold, sort of foot the supports, but the angle wasn't sufficient. So it was when you put the support against plasterboard, it was wanting to slide up again because the weight of the plasterboard was just pushing it off. So it ended up being that I needed to take this panel off, lift it back down, and look at moving the rail that's on the floor back a fair bit, maybe another 60 centimeters. And with that, then you get a better sort of perpendicular for these supports to come in up. Thankfully, they've got the telescopic supports, and you can also you've got sort of pump action as well on the top end. So it will take you up to about 2.4 meters maximum. So possibly won't work on the ceilings, but for situations like this, because obviously I've got a few of these walls that are coming in on an angle because it's within the loft area. So very useful for that. So then it's a question of just increasing the length in preparation for, so I don't have to play around too much once the plasterboard's up there. I could like to be holding it with one hand and just trying to organise the support with the other. So I think I'm ready there. I moved the rail back. I put in a bit of timber on as well because I found it was just a little bit shy of the top ceiling joists. I can always put some trim on the bottom. It's pretty easier to do that than the top. So now you can see the perpendicular works quite well. The support's up against the rail on the floor. All I'm trying to do is get it as tight as I can to the wall, and then that first support goes on quickly. Second support goes on fairly quickly, and then actually you just sort of pump it up. Got a little handle there, just pump it up just to get some pressure on it. And then the third and final one. So you see, it's not too difficult. You've just got initially the weight of the plasterboard that you've got to lift up, sort of balance on your head or whatever, just to get it into position. But if you're organised, everything's there and ready to help. And then it's a question of getting a few screws in while I can to hold the plasterboard in place. And obviously the more screws that go in, the more it'll hold. So I also didn't want to be messing around too much with the blocks that are in place, so just luckily there's enough room to put the ladder through in between the first two, and then like I said, it's a question of getting going with with the plasterboard screws. And what I realised yesterday was when I started doing the plasterboard, I hadn't changed the bit on the head of my screwdriver. There's normally specific bits that come for the plasterboard screws, and I was still using a PZ2, which is sort of fairly standard, sort of Phillips type. But it wasn't working well with the plasterboard screws, and so initially I had actually been piloting the rails. Anyway, it sort of came to me yesterday when I realised why it wasn't screwing directly into the rails easily. Found a bit the right size for the plasterboards or plasterboard screws, and everything's worked well. So there's still a bit of life left in the old grey matter. From time to time, I completely forget what I'm doing, and then I need to sort of re-educate myself on what I'd like to do. So I was doing the insulation. The first piece I brought up, laid out, and it comes it's sort of shrink wrapped when it comes. And normally, if you need to cut it, you cut it while it's still shrink wrapped because it's much easier to do. But I'd forgotten all about that. So the first one, I sort of unleashed it, and it's a good sort of 3 meters by 1.2 meters. So it's a sort of 10 foot by 4 foot, great big blob of insulation that I then had to try and cut through. So anyway, after I'd done that, I suddenly realised you meant to do the cutting while it's still in the bag, while it's still shrink wrapped. So didn't make that mistake twice. And there's all these things. It's been a while since I've done any plasterboard or anything. The last time was when I was working for the commune in Normandy. And it's easy. You quickly, at my age, you forget things quite easily. Anyway, first panel's in, and just checking there's enough screws. Get a few more in there just to make sure it's all nice and held. And then we'll be ready for the second panel. And this amount of footage was about 55 minutes long, so it's been sped up sort of 4 times. And that's just to get 2 panels in, essentially, just because of the awkwardness of the positioning of them. I'll still have to work out exactly what I'm gonna do with the ceilings. That'll be more fun and games coming up. But for now, if I can crack on with the walls and try and get all the walling in place and the insulation, which is horrible material to work with, and it's really hot upstairs up in this room or on the first floor. Right, so I think I'm just about done with the first panel. The framing's more or less where it should be. It just sits across quite nicely. Just ripped down one of the other joists I had into 4 pieces, and that made up this framing. And then in the other room, I'll possibly use the metal rails. I've got some new brackets that allow you the distance for putting the insulation in as well. Around about, the insulation is 20 centimetres thick, 200 millimetres thick, or 8 inches thick, depending on which part of the world you're watching this from. So with the support, with the rails, the metal rails, you get brackets. I've bought some brackets which are actually 30 centimetres long, about 12 inches, but it means then you can get a good fixing onto the rafters, and it still allows you sort of 20 centimetres, which will then take the insulation. So it should be nice and toasty in this house come late autumn and winter. Shouldn't be losing too much heat via the walls or ceilings. So you've got 200mm going all the way around all the ceilings, and the ceiling spaces where it's angled, and then the partitions, you've got 50mm or 2-inch insulation just between that. So that should be should be sufficient for just the partition walls. And then you can see there on the right hand side that is the partition between myself and my neighbours. That's been boarded out now, and obviously put insulation in there as well, and I'll put some sort of bitumen sheeting in as well at the back of that, because there was sort of vast holes between the partition wall, and he's got issues with his roof at the moment. There's a great chunk of it that's missing, and he's not looking like he's doing anything about it anytime soon, because it's sort of where it comes in, where the water ingress is in sort of the storeroom at the area at the back. So I'm not overly concerned with it, but I want to try and protect my property as much as possible, so hence the bitumen sheeting that went over that whole back wall, and then put the metal frames in, and then put the plasterboard in. Right, so second board seems to be in position. So I've got a rail on the floor that's holding the support of the props there, and then you've got a rail that's sitting on the lower plasterboards, which are helping to take the weight of the plasterboard, and then it's just a matter of getting some screws in. So again, 60 centimetre centres, the boards are 1.2 metres wide, 4 foot wide, so you've got 2 foot centres, and once you've got the first one in place, generally everything runs slightly easier. We've sort of worked out the system of doing it. Works a little bit easier on the next one, but like I said, it's still 55 minutes worth of work to get two pieces of plasterboard in place, and then there'll still be slightly smaller cuts on the left hand side when that gets closed off, which will be sort of one of the next jobs. And then I'll need to run as much plasterboard out as possible, and there's still 8 or 9 sheets downstairs. Bring those up as well and try and get it so that all the plasterboard's in place, so that I can do the final partition wall, which will be for this bedroom, and that will be with the door opening on the right hand side to get me in, and also utilising the window which I'm going to be replacing, and putting a window in on that wall that's the opposite side of the stairwell, so that allows natural light and ventilation in from the Velux switches there across the hallway and into the bedroom. So the light you're seeing now is what's coming from the Velux, so that should remain more or less as is once that bit, because the window's quite a size anyway, so the window can be replacing down one of the windows it's been replaced because it's single glazed, but it's in decent nick. It just needs re-puttying and repainting. But other than that, the frame of that's all solid, so quite nice as well to keep a piece of that and utilise it again in this new space. So getting near to the end of this video, just showing you what can be done if you use a bit of grey matter. And so now I've got the system of how I can get in these sort of uprights, these horizontals or verticals that are on an angle. And obviously if you had 2 men it would be much easier, but it's me. Anyway, thanks ever so much for watching. Thanks to all those guys that have bought me coffee recently, and I'll catch you on the next video.